famous creators of popular entertainment.
Disney offered me a job to come to work for him. This is the true story. But Darwin Fenner says, son, let me tell you, you're going to do good out there. He says, you're good and you're going to make it out there, but you're going to be a big fish, but in a big, big pond. He says, you stay right here in New Orleans, you'll be a big fish in a little pond. He says, Mardi Gras is opening to everybody. This guy was a visionary. He says, everybody's going to be a part of this, and says, it should be. He said this. He says, you'll be building more floats and everything. You stay here. And then Walt Disney was like a god to me. Man, I said no, and that, but yet, because he was proven so right.
By the mid-1960s, some Orleanians felt that Carnival had become tired and needed a boost. For restaurateur Owen Brennan Jr., known as Pip, it was a mix of business and pleasure to do something about the celebration.
After the 1968 Mardi Gras season, the hotel occupancy rate had dropped below 50%. And if you remember back then, we didn't have anywhere near the hotel rooms that we have in the city today. So less than 50% of that figure was pretty dramatic. So some of us professional men got together and said that we'd better do something about Mardi Gras from a visitor standpoint. Because obviously it was going down. We weren't getting the visitors that we should have.
Named after the Roman god of wine, Bacchus had an earlier earthly incarnation. Brennan's father had been part of a group called Bacchus that presented carnival balls for tourists in the 1950s. The son's new crew wanted to be different.
We wanted to put a very large parade on the streets with a lot of animation and bringing in an international celebrity that would kind of boost the excitement and the interest for Mardi Gras. So that's how Bacchus came about, and we think that we've accomplished our goal.
And a big departure from carnival tradition would be a monarch chosen from that Mount Olympus of the West, Hollywood. Entertainer Danny Kaye reigned as the first Bacchus.
Danny Kaye was a personal friend of ours here at the restaurant, a personal friend of my family. And of course, Danny didn't know that much about the Mardi Gras celebration. He knew about Mardi Gras in New Orleans, but he really didn't know what it was all about. The first requirement was he wanted Edith Head to be his designer. So that took place in California. And then second of all, it was very cold that particular night. I mean, really cold. So he wanted a heated blanket on the float. Well, as you know, that's very difficult because the float's not that. Back in those days, the float wasn't that prepared to plug in a warm, heated blanket. So we got a blanket that said, sure, Danny, it's plugged in, let's go. And he said, man, it's cold up there, I don't know what. But of course, when he got on that float and he saw all those people out on the street, and of course he thought they were all there just for him, then his adrenaline started pumping and he got on stage, and the rest is history. He didn't know more to use that blanket than a man in the moon.
Pip Brennan's memories of Bob Hope's reign include the handling of a purely practical matter.
We had to stop the parade in front of the Jung Hotel, and so Bob could go to the bathroom. And we had to take him off the float, and you can imagine going through the throngs of people, because when the float stopped and he started on the float, I mean, you can imagine what was going on with the excitement. And then we had to get him through the crowd with the hordes of police, and they were really tough, into the Jung lobby, into the men's room.
Most Bacchus celebrity kings reigned graciously, with one notable exception.
Well, one was Jackie Gleason, which disappointed us because everybody remembers Ralph Crandon. And he really wasn't that bad, but he was difficult. And one of the main reasons he was difficult was he flew in on Saturday early evening, and he just leaving the Bob Hope Golf Classic. So he was tired. Then he had just quit smoking and just quit drinking. And then number three, he and his wife had a terrible argument on the way down. So he was not in a good mood, and it kind of rubbed off for the whole weekend. He was a little difficult, but when he got on that float, that adrenaline started pumping, and that stage appearance came, and he really performed.
king commands that you have fun. The king commands that you enjoy yourself.
Not to be outshined by the stars are the floats themselves. Yet another Bacchanalian innovation. Floats link together in tandem to create a much larger one.
I was in a plane, in a Delta plane at the New Orleans airport, and unfortunately there was a plane that had crashed. And I was inside our plane. We were already on the way to take off, so they didn't bring us back. We had to sit there for an hour. So I was watching what was going on, and I saw all these little carts running around, pulling luggage around. And you might have 5 or 6 carts going behind the track. And I said, well, how can they do that? Because when you turn the first machine, each one of them cut shorter and shorter. So I investigated that, found out how they did it, and then I got together with Blaine Curran, and I said, look, let's build these 2 floats, put them together. Well, the Baccagator was the float that we ultimately, with our idea of putting 2 floats together, then we put 3 floats together. And the concept was to build the biggest and largest float ever built. And then we had the World's Fair going at the time, and I was involved in the design of the World's Fair. And Blaine had designed the rear gate of the World's Fair and built the big alligators. There were several big alligators. After the World's Fair had ended, we took that alligator head and the body, the front part of it, and we brought it over there and put it on a float.
Signature floats, such as the Baccagator, are the ones that we see in a parade every year. Also included in Bacchus's menagerie are King Kong and family.
Our first year, we had the girl in Kong's hand, and the hand moved up and down. And we had to take her off not too long after the parade started because she got motion sickness.
And they put her in chemise and gorgeous coming down the street. But what do you think happened? All the guys were laying out on the street in front of, we couldn't get the floats through.
The size of the floats isn't the only thing that Bacchus changed in Carnival, according to one fan of the season.
The tradition of throwing trinkets from the floats was forever changed with the coming of the Bacchus parade. Prior to that, parades threw favors from the floats, and they were very rare. When you caught a pair of beads from the float, it was like a treasure because very few were thrown.
Well, I've brought some from my collection. I think these were thrown in the 50s, no later than the 60s, and these were the famous beads made in Czechoslovakia, and there were so many different varieties.
But once the Super Cruise came, instead of throwing maybe 1 pair of beads per block, they now throw hundreds and hundreds, and I don't even know, maybe thousands of beads per block.
Now they're really very valuable, and of course at one time we used to fight for these, and they'd break in your hands or wind up in the gutters, but they really, I think, are much better quality than the plastic that we have now.
But when my children were growing up, if they didn't catch an entire bag full of beads at a parade, it was considered that the parade wasn't a success.
You might remember I think they were called rice beads, and I don't really think they're made out of rice, but they kind of look like it. And if you have any of these in your attic, hang on to them because they're actually quite valuable now.
I'm not sure this is true, but they say that the reason all the houses are sinking in New Orleans is because the attics are filled with beads.
New Orleans police are now on strike. What happened?
The vote was unanimous.
What do you think? What do you think of this strike?
It's good.
Why is it good? Why is any strike good?
For so many years, the people have never cared about the New Orleans Police Department. Finally, we're showing them that we live in the city and we pay taxes and we'd like to have low benefits. Instead of a mayor making $60,000 a year, why can't we make a decent living?
In 1979, as Mardi Gras approached, the New Orleans police went on strike. They wanted more bargaining power and benefits. They used the parades as leverage.
When the police strike first started, I think public sentiment was solidly behind the police. Dutch Morial was mayor of New Orleans. He was the new mayor. He was the city's first black mayor, and so for a certain segment of the population, he was unpopular and being tested. And of course, people just emotionally liked the police.
News anchorman Dennis Waltering covered the strike and recalls the first weekend of the parade season before the decision was made not to parade at all.
You wouldn't know if tomorrow's parade or even tonight's parade was going to be going on. Things were that fluid. We would find out an hour, a couple hours in advance whether a parade was canceled or not.
We don't realize how many people have certain days as part of their traditions and as part of their rituals. For example, Bacchus Sunday uptown. There's people that have been having parties for years, and Endymion Saturday along the Canal Street route. And of course, there were some parades, some Orleans Parish parades that did parade in Jefferson Parish that year. But there were other parades, including the old line parades like Nomus and Proteus and Comus and Rex, that to them, that being in New Orleans and being on St. Charles Avenue was so much a part of their tradition and their culture that they just could not parade anywhere else. As the strike went on, and as the police stood firm, and as they brought in a Teamsters official from Detroit, gradually sentiment shifted from the police side to the mayor.
WDSU news anchor Norman Robinson also covered the strike when he was a reporter for WWL.
The people who came in had no real understanding of local politics, of the local landscape. They came across as dubious, as rather shady, and the public was turned off. And they made a lot of political blunders as a result of that. One of the most uncomfortable things happened when a band of striking police officers turned into a roving mob and went down to egg the mayor's house. I thought that was rather, and it got really touchy for a while because the mayor's bodyguards, who were police officers themselves, put their weapons, and there was almost a confrontation. It could have really gotten ugly had cooler heads not prevailed.
So the Tuesday before Mardi Gras, I called together everybody that had not paraded at that point and proposed that we just call it off.
I remember the mayor called us all in and asked us would we cooperate, and there was no problems at all, very little discussion. Everybody said of course.
With the decision to cancel the parades, the strike fell apart.
As the duly elected mayor of this city, it would have been irresponsibility of the worst sort to yield to that type of demand. It would have been an abdication of my responsibilities in a representative form of government to surrender that decision-making authority to a union not accountable or responsive to the electorate.
A very decisive moment, and to me one of the really important moments in the whole history of Carnival, this evening when the crew captains on television, standing next to the mayor, issued a statement saying, "We will not be held hostage by the Teamsters Union. We will not parade." Now, part of the strategy of the police and the unions was they were thinking, look, people in New Orleans are so crazy about parading that they're going to want to parade and they're going to do anything. They're going to settle this just so they can parade.
At least they didn't carry out what they had tried to do, and I think the city was glad that we did it that way.
I think it was a big moment for Morial too, getting the backing of, I guess, what you call the Mardi Gras establishment and getting their full support. I think he always felt grateful to Carnival for standing behind him, and in fact, Morial was a very good mayor and a very supportive mayor for Mardi Gras.
I thought he demonstrated superb statesmanship. I think his actions during the police strike set the tone for his administration.
Even though the parades in New Orleans were canceled, Mardi Gras was still celebrated.
That was my job, to go on the street to see what it was like without a traditional Fat Tuesday. And I approached this figure standing in the middle of the street with a pig's head mask on. And I thought, that's really symbolic.
What's the significance of this mask? What are you trying to say? Well, I get called pig all year long, so I'm gonna mask like one.
It was hilarious and sad at the same time because the police were so dispirited by then.
We're just out here. We want to try to get a contract. Most of us want to be back at work. We don't want to be out here Mardi Gras Day. We'd rather be in front of the parade routes with the people. We all enjoy working, and we're just forced to be out here right now.
On Fat Tuesday, a team of almost 1,100 National Guardsmen and state police troopers stood in for the New Orleans police.
It was a little creepy to see the National Guard standing there with rifles. There was just something rather menacing about it, but they were good-natured and pretty much they seemed to warm to the celebration, and there were lots of jokes about them and what was going on.
I remember the National Guard a little bit. I mean, it was like there were extra costumes. There was a theme to some of the costumes going on.
Masks around their necks, there were flowers in their lapels, and they looked totally relaxed. And I thought then how the magic of Carnival had been able to even disintegrate their most severe stance.
And the French Quarter was like a festival. It was a street festival. I think by Mardi Gras, what happened is that the pressure was over. I mean, there couldn't be any more damage done. We lost the parades, and so the day itself was a street festival. But what people forget when they talk about how nice Mardi Gras was how painful the week and a half leading to that was. It was really something that really tore at this community.
Over the years, Carnival has witnessed many changes. By the early 1950s, the use of mules to pull the parade floats through the city streets was discontinued.
The mules pull the garbage wagons. That's where the mules came from to power the floats. See, all year long, the mules pull the garbage wagons, and at Mardi Gras, the mules pull the floats. And that was a source of power. That was before the Russian tractors showed up.
I knew some of the mules intimately because we used to go back by the Cloven Dairy and play around there. And some of the mules were from the Cloven Dairy. The rest were from the city sanitation department. And you'd have mule skinners would be leading a mule team in the parade. And you'd have a red cape on with the hood, looked like the Devil's Apprentice or something. The mules pulling this very elegant float. And of course, the mules would leave behind their message every now and then. And that made for a very earthy remembrance.
I remember one mule just sat down on the ground, They'd pull on it. But it was great. It meant the parade wasn't leaving, and it was not leaving. You were enjoying it not leaving. It was really funny to watch these crazy mules.
And I was very sorry to see the mules go, quite frankly, because the tractors have nothing on mules.
Many Carnival fans felt there was no better place to watch the parades than the French Quarter, traditionally part of the parade route. This 1954 national broadcast of the Comus Parade on Mardi Gras night gives us a glimpse of what it was like on those historic streets.
When you were watching that parade, you were watching the scale, the Carnival parades, the old time ones I'm talking about, that was scaled enough to go down that street, down Royal Street, against the backdrop, in the sense that this is essentially a 19th century celebration, the look of it, in its 19th century setting.
It was magical because the sound reverberated against the buildings, the backdrops of balconies, the intimacy of those old line crews which had such beautiful floats rolling down those small streets was really intoxicating.
Probably my best Mardi Gras memories are marching with the Warren Easton High School band in the 60s through the French Quarter. Now, the minute we turn off of Canal Street onto Royal, it was another world, with the flambeau lights playing off the buildings, those 200-year-old buildings, and the crowd so really right up on top of you. It was unlike anything I've ever experienced since then.
Many people saw parades in the French Quarter through television on WDSU.
This was Mel Levitt, and a Channel 6 studio was at 520 Royal Street. So what they did, they'd stick a camera on the balcony. And Mel would be there, and sometimes have like a celebrity guest. And so they'd just be shooting down as the parade would pass. And so each evening during the parade season, Freddie selected parades after the news at 10:30. You'd have this half-hour version of the parade with Mel telling about the parade. So that was the viewpoint that many New Orleanians saw the parades in the waterfront.
That's the sunflower in the middle of your picture. Here the picture is governed by another quotation, that of Moore's, as the sunflower turns to her God when he sets.
In 1969, when the crew of Bacchus premiered, the size of its floats proved cumbersome for the quarter.
The crowd was so close to the float,
and they were from wall to wall, and then the noise and the whole thing. At one time, I can remember this very well, because at one moment I thought to myself, I said, you know, this is really serious, and there's a very dangerous situation here.
Responding to concerns from the police and fire departments, the city banned parades from the French Quarter after the 1972 season.
The new larger parades clearly were having trouble navigating the French Quarter, so they were the ones that should have been kept out. It made no sense to ban the old parades, and it was a great loss.
But perhaps the greatest loss for fans of the Old Line Carnival parades came in 1992.
What's before us today is discrimination.
An ordinance passed by the City Council was intended to address allegations of discrimination on the part of carnival organizations. Some of the oldest crews viewed the ordinance as government interference.
I think that what's happened with these crews that are pulling out is that they sort of say, well, if they don't want us, then we won't do it. In addition to feeling like perhaps some of that anger is what is really out in the street, and perhaps they're not safe.
I don't think the problems are as bad as it might appear to be. I would think that maybe some members are saying that, they don't want anyone to tell them what to do, and I can appreciate that, I understand that. But on the other hand, I think if they look at the law and tell us what's wrong with it.
After several months of hearings, and based on the recommendations of an advisory committee, the ordinance was rewritten and called for crews to sign an affidavit.
It was really a very complicated issue, but in its simplest form, the City Council asked every parading organization to sign an affidavit that would promise they would not discriminate on any basis, really, for membership. And in good conscience, the O-Line crews couldn't possibly sign that. For 125 years, they had used a blackball system where when someone applied for membership, any single member could veto their membership.
I think they felt that to do otherwise would mean that government was dictating to them how they should organize themselves and what their procedures should be. And so that was one of the reasons they decided not to parade.
In 1992, Momus and Comus ceased parading. The next year, Proteus did the same. No longer a part of the scene are those 3 nighttime parades, with a history and tradition that link to the 19th century origins of the New Orleans-style carnival parade. Though they don't parade anymore, the 3 crews still stage their carnival balls, culminating in Comus's Mardi Gras evening festivity. The traditional grand finale of the season is the meeting of the courts of Comus and Rex, a ceremony that dates back to 1882.
The meeting of the courts means many things. It is one of the great rituals in all of Carnival, and certainly in all of New Orleans. It's very imposing, it's very lofty. It's also a little sad because you hate to see it end. And the meeting of the courts marks that end.
From the perspective of the ball floor, it's supposed to represent the beginning of the end of the carnival season when Rex and Comus meet.
Good evening. I'm Terry Gershner.
But I think even more importantly is that with the television broadcast of it, there's a whole generation that used to watch the broadcast on Channel 6, which each Mardi Gras evening for a half hour. Stilted broadcast just showing the meeting of the 2 courts, showing the ritual when they meet. It was not great TV by any sense, but it was happening. It was something that was happening. It was something that was us. It was something that was New Orleans.
The last broadcast of a meeting of the courts on Channel 6 was in 1991. In 1997, WYES began broadcasting the Rex Ball and resumed coverage of the meeting of the courts.
Sometimes it's very slow, it's very ritualized, but it means something to people just to see it because it's something that's genuine. It's something that's a tradition that evolved, that predated television, that predated the real emphasis on tourism. It was just a way of people doing something. And I think that there's an audience out there that just likes seeing this because it's part of New Orleans. It's one more thing that just makes us a little bit different as a community.
You get up on Mardi Gras Day and there's a feeling. It's a certain something special that is deep down within. And it's a certain joy and a certain happiness.
Carnival is the cultural bedrock of New Orleans. It embodies the city's passions for music, masquerade, dance, parades.
Our new year begins on Mardi Gras. We even say such things as I'll start my diet after Mardi Gras.
One year in college, I went fishing on Fat Tuesday. I think it's unforgivable.
Many years I had my guns on my side, and I was Annie Oakley or somebody.
To me, cheap champagne and the moon pie was the perfect way to toast the end of the carnival season.
The crowd has an odor itself. In those days, a little bit different. It smelled more like Sub Rosa. Nowadays, it smells more like a band, you know.
When the last band marches past and the last confetti is thrown, little old New Orleans will settle down once more. But they'll have plenty to talk about until next year.
Mardi Gras, the Passing Parade, is made possible by the WYES Producer Circle, a group of generous contributors dedicated to the support of Channel 12's local productions. And major corporate funding is provided by the Whitney Bank, taking pride in what's uniquely ours, the Whitney.
Hi,